saying you've got sound and vision. Let me know if that's the case. It's looking and sounding good. How very generous. Okay, thank you. I've probably got several apologies to make. This hasn't been the most organized week of my life, far from it. So that's one apology, a state of ongoing catching up. And the other apology is that I really don't get the hang of new technology. I'm really a kind of old school kind of person. So I think I probably write better than I talk, and I talk better to people than I do to machines. I was told that actually webinars worked better if I could find something that would symbolize my audience, but I've walked around my office looking for anything that I could talk to, and there's nothing at all. No dolls, no faces, no pictures. I found a map of the world, but that just frightened me. This is going to have to be blind. It's like kind of talking in the toilet. But anyway, I'll launch into it. What was my basic position? What was I trying to say? Well, I suppose I was trying to say in very general terms that what we've been doing in mobile learning over the last 10 years approximately, I think the emphasis and the balance has shifted. I'm not sure if everyone's noticed it or if everyone would agree with me. And I think the balance has shifted because at one point, people in mobile learning, doing research in mobile learning, were in a position to portray themselves as part of the vanguard of e-learning, maybe along with games-based learning, maybe along with virtual worlds, but they were essentially at the cutting edge of using technology to deliver learning, and to deliver learning within institutions. And in fact, institutions act as the gatekeepers to both learning and the technologies of learning. And that led to certain assumptions about how you then deploy that technology and who takes responsibility for it, and how you manage change, how you maybe it also led to a kind of rhetoric of innovation, that we were innovating. And it led to a model of what we were doing that was driven from within, I don't know, universities, schools, colleges, and maybe I'm talking principally about Western Europe, and a few other hotspots like maybe South Africa, Malaysia, Japan. It led to a model that was essentially top-down, where eventually the kind of rank and file and then the majority of students would be able to enjoy and exploit what we'd invented and evaluated, but kind of under the terms that we decided. My point, I suppose, really is I don't think that's any longer the case. In the first few years, actually, of mobile learning, I think we were quite proud of ourselves if we could even make the wiring work. But nowadays, the market takes care of technology. You know, we'd be wasting our time within the university sector or the school sector if we tried to actually invent technologies for learning. There's millions of dollars, millions of pounds going into commercial development of technology. So in that sense, we might have lost a leading position, but that's not the important sense, I think, in which we've lost a leading position. Actually, technology for learning is now no longer top-down. It's actually outside in the sense that we're on the back foot as innovators, researchers. Who's on the front foot is actually the rest of the world. Our students, society, culture in general is now awash with powerful, personal and connected technologies, and the risk of overstating it, I think too much of a preoccupation with how we've gone about mobile learning previously is kind of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. And so I'm more concerned these days with the Titanic than I am with the deck chairs. With the weather as it is in England, you can understand why I'm not really very interested in deck chairs. Okay, so the first point would be, yeah, our societies, any of them to a greater or lesser extent, in loads and loads of very different ways, are awash with technologies that give people connection and give people mobilities. And I think that is transforming our societies in all sorts of ways and has all sorts of implications and knock-on effects for education, both for maybe what education or learning means in the kind of profound sense, but what education means in terms of the institutions, the ministries, the officials, the teachers, the schools that have had a substantial share in defining and delivering education for everyone. Okay, so how exactly is that playing out, and where is it playing out? Well, I think on the first of my topics, the point I was trying to make was there is a case, a pretty heavily contested case, that education is there to service the economy. It's there to put people into jobs. It's there to prepare for people to go into adult employment or to return to adult employment. And in fact, much of the early money for mobile learning was very explicitly intended to help people back into formal education, back into the economy, and paying taxes. That's why the EU funded some of the work we did quite explicitly. And okay, so has the economy changed? The economy that we may or may not be servicing, has it changed? Yeah, I think it has. If we just look at the volume and the proportion of artifacts, resources, jobs, organizations, assets that revolve around mobile technologies, it's a large volume, it's an increasing volume, it's increasing at the expense of other sectors and other assets. I mean, certainly trivially, you know, we see a decline in wristwatches, we see a decline in CD players, we see a decline in cameras, we see a decline in landlines, but we also see, I think, not only the nature of the things that we make and buy and sell changing, but I suspect in the nature of the jobs we do and who we work with and how we work for them. And I think we're probably in a kind of slightly protected and cushioned area of the economy, those of us that work in education, especially maybe those of us working in universities, that we are knowledge workers, we can exploit technology, we have a large amount of autonomy, and that's not necessarily true of other people. Certainly in the developed world, in the moneyed economies, they work for people, and yes, this seems to give these technologies seem to put more power into their hands, making them better able to do their jobs. But I think there's probably several downsides. I mean, for example, people talk about the day extender syndrome. I mean, the fact that once you had laptops, the pressure of work would mean you could work at home. But now, actually, with mobile devices and connectivity, you can work anywhere. You can work in the evening, you can work on holiday, you can work as you commute, you can work in planes, trains, maybe even escalators and elevators. So I think that's one sense in which maybe these technologies are less attractive than they at first sight seem. I think they also, for people who work in kind of distributed or remote or mobile jobs, I don't know, repairing things, photocopiers, cars, whatever, it actually means that they can be more closely supervised, their progress in the location can be monitored, and that leads to the possibility both of a kind of sense of surveillance, but also the possibility of de-skilling. You know, with performance support software and technologies, people's work and progress can be monitored, but also as they're connected back to base. So effectively, they don't need the level of skill that they used to. They can either be supervised by a human back at base, or they can be guided through their progress on the spot by artificial intelligence and back-end software. So that's a slightly maybe dystopic, if that's the word, yeah, dystopia, a slightly dystopic take on some of the impact of these technologies, and I guess we need to think about two things. Does it have implications for the nature of education, what we teach and how we teach, especially as in many respects, apart from the gifted and talented, education is very much like work. In many parts of the world, for some age groups, education is something that you do because it's compulsory, that you do under instruction, that you do with a large number of other people at times and places that were decided for you. That looks pretty much like work in many cases, and people leave education, especially education in those terms, potentially quite disenfranchised and disengaged. So that's one take. I mean, this is maybe a kind of highly tendentious way of putting it, but it's partly to go just raise the issues, and to point out that there might be a downside. I guess it's going to be. I haven't really thought through this part of this issue in relation to the developing world, or the world outside the moneyed economies, where subsistence plays a large part. Maybe it plays out differently there. I'd certainly worry, though, about the rhetoric of progress, development, catching up and leapfrogging. I find that deeply problematic about the impact of mobiles on the developing world. Okay, so what was the next topic? What's the next way in which I think that mobiles impact on the greater, wider world? Well, the way knowledge and learning are generated and consumed, and I think we're going through two phases. One was the introduction of computers, and the next is the introduction of mobiles. And even in relation to that first change, the introduction of computers, people have referred to an epistemological revolution, the notion that we don't acquire knowledge in the ways that we used to. We don't acquire the knowledge that we used to in ways that we used to, and we acquire knowledge in new ways, and it's new knowledge. And clearly that's saying something about learning, because that's the process of acquiring knowledge. And that's due to, and people have made that observation about the impact of computers in society and in learning and in education. But I think there is a second epistemological revolution, if you like, which is to do with mobiles. And I think that just takes it further. But if we go back to the computer era, as it were, the 1990s, for example, the Web 2.0 era maybe, and you look at stuff like the World of Warcraft, you can see people sharing and discussing ideas, images, opinions, information. This, in not a closed community, but certainly a community that is disjoint from formal education and what parts of our society think it's important to learn. People within the World of Warcraft are presumably learning and discussing and sharing something they think is very, very important, but actually the formal education probably thinks is trivial. And I think these communities that aggregate around particular topics and discuss and share their learnings are no less authentic or valuable than any other community that gathers around and shares its ideas. Universities, for example. And I think what we saw in the 70s, 80s was a breakdown of the hegemony of a certain set of ideas about what's a valuable education into a much more fragmented depiction of what it's worthwhile learning about. And I think computers and the World of Warcraft, for example, have just taken that further. What mobiles do is take that yet further in the fact that, yes, you still have transient communities, informal communities occupying cyberspace, but connected to cyberspace via their mobiles. But actually, not only can they share and discuss images and ideas, but actually mobiles allow them to generate images and ideas, information that's local, that's specific to the person and their location, in a way that being with a computer and engaging with the World of Warcraft isn't. All of a sudden, you've got images, audio, video, ideas that are location specific and potentially deeply personal to the person from whom they come. I think the other part of this conversation is to do with the value that people put on them. It's not only the case that people are discussing stuff local to a particular online community, but actually they think it's important. They valorize it, and that may or may not be at the expense of the formal curriculum.